After so many years of hustling abroad, sending money home to build houses, support his family, and sponsor many villagers to school overseas, Virek quietly became a billionaire. When he finally returned to his town, it wasn't as the rich man everyone expected. He told his family he had been deported, came back dressed like a beggar, and hid his success to test just one thing. Would they still love and respect him if the money stopped? What he discovered shattered his heart and changed his life forever. Before we continue, please like this video and subscribe to this channel. Torvald was born into a world of quiet hardship in the small town of Willow Creek, Montana. The town was surrounded by dusty roads, pine trees, and a faint hum of life that barely sustained its people. Houses were simple log structures with shingled roofs that rattled under the rain, and electricity came only a few hours each day when it came at all. Life was hard and opportunities were rare. Virek's father Jorand was a man of pride and ambition, but his pride often overshadowed his sense of responsibility. He would brag endlessly about the family's heritage, their supposed importance in the community, and the ancestors who had made a name for themselves. Yet, Jorand rarely worked. He spent most days sitting under the shade of an old oak tree, shaking his head at life's misfortunes and blaming them on everyone but himself. Money was never enough, and he constantly demanded more from his family, expecting Virek to follow in his footsteps of pride without effort. From a very young age, Virek saw the cracks in his father's character and the struggles of his family. His mother worked tirelessly, cooking over smoky stoves, tending to the small garden behind their home, and trying to keep the children fed and clothed. Virek, though small and quiet, absorbed every detail. He saw the disappointment in his mother's eyes when his father refused to help her, and he felt the weight of poverty pressing down on the family. Despite these challenges, Virek dreamed while other children played in the dusty street. He would sit by the roadside, imagining a life beyond the town. He would trace the clouds in the sky, imagining ships, planes, and cities far away, places where opportunity was not limited to who you were or whose family you came from. He read every scrap of paper he could find, borrowed old books from anyone who had them, and listened carefully to travelers who spoke of the wider world. Even at 14 years old, Virek promised himself that he would one day escape the limitations of Willow Creek and build a life where he could provide for his family and himself without compromise. When he turned 23, that dream turned into action. With nothing but hope, determination, and a few dollars saved from odd jobs in the town, Virek left for Germany. He carried no luggage but a small bag, a notebook filled with ideas, and a heart full of ambition. Saying goodbye was bitter. His mother wept quietly, whispering prayers under her breath, while his father's words were a mixture of pride and expectation. "Make us proud, son, but remember, money is everything." Virek knew his father's pride could never be satisfied, but he also knew he could not allow it to shackle him. Berlin was nothing like he had imagined. The city was cold, gray, and unforgiving. The streets were filled with people moving fast, eyes focused ahead, indifferent to the young American who had arrived with dreams bigger than his pocket. Virek struggled at first. He slept in cramped hostels with peeling wallpaper and broken heaters, sometimes sharing a bed with strangers to save a few euros. He worked menial jobs, cleaning streets in the early morning chill, waiting tables in crowded restaurants, delivering newspapers before dawn. He faced constant rejection, resumes ignored, doors shut in his face, and nights where hunger gnawed at his stomach while he cried quietly into his pillow. Yet, despite the endless hardships, Virek never gave up. He carried a quiet resolve within him, a belief that every small step forward, every struggle endured was shaping him for something greater. Slowly he began to learn the rules of this new world. He saved every cent he could, studied business and technology at night, and sought opportunities wherever he could find them. Small investments turned into bigger ones, and with patience, intelligence, and sheer grit, Virek's efforts began to bear fruit. Years of sacrifice transformed him. From the boy who had slept on hostel floors and delivered newspapers to earn a few euros, Virek became a man of wealth and influence. He founded a tech company that grew rapidly, eventually expanding into international market. With careful strategy, relentless determination, and a keen eye for opportunity, he became a self-made billionaire, a man who had achieved what few could dream of. Yet no matter how high he rose, Virek never forgot Willow Creek. He quietly sent money to his father, funding the construction of a new house, supporting education, and providing for the needy in the town. But his generosity came with strings. Joran's expectations grew with every gift. Soon he wanted more than just money. He wanted influence, respect, and the kind of power that comes from controlling wealth. Virek realized that while money could provide comfort, it could not always buy loyalty or integrity. And deep down, he began to wonder whether the values he had learned abroad, the lessons of hard work, humility, and perseverance would ever be understood in the place he once called home. Years had passed since Virek left Willow Creek. The boy who had once carried nothing but hope and dreams had grown into a man of immense wealth and influence abroad. He had built houses, funded schools, and even sent dozens of children from his town abroad on scholarship. Yet, despite all his success, one question haunted him. Would the people he once called family and community truly value him for who he was, or only for the money he could provide? It was this question that drove Virek to make a daring, almost reckless decision. He would return to Willow Creek not as the billionaire who had conquered Berlin but as a poor man stripped of wealth, status, and recognition. He wanted to see the true hearts of those he had left behind. Weeks before his arrival, the entire town had been buzzing with excitement. Joran Virek's father had promised the community grand things: the construction of a school, scholarships for young children, and financial support for every household in need. Joran, ambitious and prideful, even declared his intention to contest for the position of community chairman. He told everyone that when his son returned, the town would prosper and his family would rise in honor. Colorful banners were strung along the streets, drums were polished, and musicians rehearsed their songs. Townsfolk scrubbed their houses and polished their shoes, all eager to celebrate the homecoming of the rich prodigal son. But when Virek arrived that gray morning, the reality could not have been more different from what anyone expected. His skin, tanned from years abroad, was partially hidden beneath a threadbare shirt, torn trousers, and worn-out sandals. His small bag was frayed at the seams, and his hair fell in unkempt tufts around his forehead. The boy who had left with dreams and hope now looked like a wandering beggar. No one on the town streets recognized him, not even his father. At first, townsfolk stared in polite curiosity. Then confusion. Whispers began to spread. Is this him? Surely not. Joran, standing proudly at the center of the celebration, felt a chill run down his spine as the celebrated son approached. The pomp, the drums, and the crowd, all orchestrated to honor a successful billionaire, now felt like a cruel mockery. His face turned pale, his chest tightened. The man before him was not the son he had boasted about. His promises, his grand plans, and his ambitions for the community suddenly hung in the air like an empty echo. "Father," Virek said softly, approaching him, hoping for even a flicker of recognition. Joran stiffened, his voice trembling, a mixture of fear and embarrassment. I don't know you," he said coldly. "I have no son who looks like this." The word struck Virek like a thunderbolt. His father's pride had evaporated in the face of the beggar he had become. The carefully planned celebration, the banners, the drums, all for a son who, according to Joran's own words, did not exist. The townsfolk, sensing the tension, shifted uncomfortably. Some laughed nervously, unsure whether the man before them was really Virek or some fraud. Others lowered their heads, whispering apologies that would never be spoken aloud. Heart-pounding but determined, Virek walked slowly through the town. He passed the scrubbed market stalls, the polished drums, and the streets lined with townsfolk, expecting a rich benefactor. Shopkeepers ignored his polite requests for basic goods. When he asked to buy something on credit, they shook their heads, muttering under their breath. Neighbors who once nodded politely now looked past him, pretending he did not exist. The laughter, gossip, and whispers cut him more deeply than poverty ever had. Then a sudden rain began to fall, turning the streets into muddy rivers. Virek ducked under a small awning, trying to stay dry, but his torn clothes offered little protection. Hungry and tired, he went to a small food stall, asking if he could buy something on credit. The boys working there exchanged mocking glances, and before he could react, poured buckets of water over him, laughing as he stumbled and sputtered, soaked from head to toe. Humiliated, Virek ran down a narrow alley, mud squelching beneath his feet, water dripping from his hair and clothes. It was then that he noticed her, a young girl standing under a small, tattered umbrella, staring at him with wide, curious eyes. Her name was Leora. Unlike the others, she didn't laugh or turn away. She stepped forward, helping him steady himself. "Are you okay?" she asked, her voice soft but filled with genuine concern. She shared her umbrella with him, and offered a small piece of bread from her bag. For the first time since returning, Virek felt something he hadn't expected. Hope. Someone saw him not for the tattered clothes he wore or the empty bag he carried, but for the person he truly was. His heart, battered by disappointment and betrayal, warmed at the kindness of this stranger. They sat together under the umbrella, the rain falling softly around them. Virek spoke quietly, careful not to reveal too much. He told her of his journey from the town to Germany, the struggles and sacrifices that had shaped him, and the quiet victories no one had seen. Leora listened intently, asking thoughtful questions and offering laughter that reminded him of the goodness still present in the world. In that moment, Virek realized something profound. Wealth and status could test people's loyalty, but kindness, true selfless kindness, revealed the heart, and Leora, with her gentle spirit and open heart, had unknowingly passed the first test. Little did he know, this encounter would be the beginning of a bond that would change both their lives forever. A friendship born out of empathy, honesty, and quiet courage, setting the stage for something deeper, more meaningful and transformative than either of them could have imagined. After that rainy day in the narrow alley, Virek found himself drawn to Leora in a way he hadn't expected. Her kindness lingered in his mind, a soft light in the darkness of disappointment he had experienced since returning to the town. It was rare, almost impossible, to find someone so genuinely compassionate in a place where wealth often dictated respect and friendship. They began meeting secretly, away from the prying eyes of townsfolk who had mocked and ridiculed him. Sometimes it was under the large oak tree at the edge of the town, its branches stretching wide as if offering an embrace, the leaves whispering softly in the wind. Other times it was near the quiet river where the water flowed calmly, oblivious to human struggles, reflecting the moon and stars like tiny silver mirrors. They talked for hours, sharing stories, dreams, and laughter that felt like a balm to Virek's weary heart. The laughter was shy at first, cautious like fragile glass, but soon it grew louder, freer, and more intimate. Leora admired him in ways she could hardly explain. His humility, despite the quiet strength she sensed in him, intrigued her. She noticed the way he listened to her, truly listened with patience and empathy, as though each word she spoke mattered deeply. His intelligence shone through even in ordinary conversations. He spoke thoughtfully about life, about dreams, about the wider world beyond their small town. And there was a gentleness in him, a softness that contrasted sharply with the harshness of the town, the cruelty of those who had mocked him, and the greed he had endured. Virek, in turn, found himself opening up in ways he rarely had with anyone else. He told her about his childhood, the loneliness of feeling different, the sting of seeing his father value pride over love, and the relentless struggles of a family that asked for more than he could give. He spoke of his days in Berlin, freezing nights in cramped hostels, long hours at menial jobs that barely paid for food, the endless rejections, and the silent desperation he had carried in his chest. Leora listened intently, her eyes never leaving his, her expressions alternating between concern, admiration, and quiet sadness for the life he had endured. In return, Leora shared pieces of her own life, bits of herself that she had never spoken aloud. She told him of the town's limitations, the unspoken rules that measured people by wealth rather than character, and the quiet dreams she held in her heart, a life of learning, travel, and purpose beyond mere survival. She spoke of the weight of family expectations, neighbors who whispered judgments, and the small moments when she had felt invisible, powerless, and trapped. Virek understood her in ways few could. She felt seen, understood, and heard for the first time in her life. As days turned into weeks, their bond deepened. What had begun as gratitude and curiosity slowly transformed into a quiet, unspoken attachment. Virek found himself anticipating her presence, cherishing the laughter that danced between them, and savoring the comfort of her understanding. Leora looked forward to his visits, the moments of shared stories and silent companionship, breaking the monotony of life constrained by poverty and social expectation. Each encounter was a small escape, a secret world they shared, hidden from the harshness of the judgmental town. One evening, the town was quiet. The sky stretched out in a blanket of stars, and fireflies flickered like tiny lanterns along the riverbank. The soft sound of water flowing over rocks created a soothing rhythm. Virek and Leora sat side by side, shoulders nearly touching, the cool night breeze brushing against their faces. The silence between them was comfortable, filled with shared understanding and unspoken emotion. "There's something I've been meaning to tell you," Virek said quietly, his voice barely louder than the whisper of the river. He hesitated, unsure how to start, aware that the truth he carried was heavy, complex, and potentially life-changing. Leora turned to him, curiosity sparkling in her eyes. "What is it?" she asked gently, sensing the seriousness in his tone. He took a deep breath, staring into the water as if drawing courage from its calmness. "There's more to me than meets the eye," he said softly. "I've lived a life you don't know about, and I've carried burdens you can't imagine." Her eyes widened slightly, but she didn't move away. She waited patiently, silently, encouraging him to continue, her hand brushing briefly against his, a gesture of comfort and trust. Virek spoke slowly, carefully revealing fragments of his past, the struggles abroad, the long nights of loneliness, the sacrifices he had made to escape poverty, and the constant test of patience and resilience he had endured. He spoke of the emotional pain, the betrayals, and the disappointments, though he still kept the truth of his immense wealth hidden for now. Leora listened in rapt attention. Her heart ached for him, and yet admiration grew stronger with every word. Here was a man who had endured more than most could imagine, yet remained humble, gentle, and compassionate. She realized that strength was not just measured in power or money, but in resilience, empathy, and the capacity to care for others despite suffering. In that quiet starlit moment, something shifted between them. Their friendship built on trust, kindness, and shared vulnerability began to blossom into something deeper. There were no grand declarations, no rushed confessions, just a quiet awareness, a slow burning connection that grew stronger with every shared laugh, every story, every glance that lingered just a moment too long. Virek felt a warmth in his chest he hadn't experienced in years. Leora's presence reminded him that true kindness and compassion were more valuable than wealth and power, and that love could emerge even in the harshest circumstances. Leora in turn felt her heart open to someone who saw her true self, who valued her not for wealth or family connections, but simply for who she was. And so, under the starlit sky of Willow Creek, two hearts began to intertwine. Their friendship, forged in adversity and tempered by honesty, slowly blossomed into a quiet, tender love. One built on understanding, compassion, and trust. Neither knew what the future held, but both knew that whatever came next, they would face it together. Hearts aligned by respect, empathy, and a bond that promised more than either had dared to hope for. The morning sun rose gently over Willow Creek, casting golden light on the dusty streets and humble homes. But on this day, the town was alive with unusual excitement. Colorful banners fluttered in the breeze. Drums beat a lively rhythm, and the scent of freshly baked bread and roasted meat filled the air. Today was no ordinary day. It was the day Virek and Leora would be married. Virek stood outside the small chapel at the edge of the town, adjusting the lapels of his simple, well-fitted suit. It wasn't flashy, but there was an undeniable air of confidence and elegance about him. His eyes scanned the crowd of townsfolk who had gathered, friends, neighbors, and those who had once sneered at him or ignored his presence. Among them was his father, Jorund, standing stiffly at the front with a forced smile. There was a tension in his posture, a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. Leora appeared then, radiant in a simple but beautiful dress. Her smile was bright, unafraid, and filled with the same warmth that had captivated Virek months ago. Their hands met, and for a moment, the world outside their small circle disappeared. It was just the two of them, connected by something deeper than words, stronger than any obstacle that had ever faced them. As the ceremony began, Virek felt the weight of the moment settle on his shoulders. He had rehearsed what he was about to do countless times in his mind, but nothing could prepare him for the surge of emotions, anticipation, nervousness, and a quiet thrill at the thought of finally revealing the truth to those who had doubted him. When it came time to speak, Virek stepped forward, his voice clear and calm. "I am not the poor man you see before you," he said, letting his eyes sweep across the gathered townsfolk. "I am Virek Jorund, the same boy who left this town many years ago to chase his dreams. I returned not to boast of wealth, but to test hearts, to see who truly cared, not for money, not for gifts, but for character, for integrity, and for kindness." A stunned silence fell over the crowd. Some townsfolk blinked in disbelief, unable to process the words. Others whispered to each other, their voices trembling with shock and confusion. Jorund's face went pale. His mouth opened, closed, then opened again as if searching for words that would never come. The boy he had disowned, the boy he had mocked and denied, had returned. Not just as a man, but as a billionaire, a man with power, influence, and the ability to shape lives. Virek paused, letting the silence linger. Then slowly he gestured around him. "I returned to see who would help me when I had nothing, to see who would treat me with respect when I appeared poor. Some of you failed that test. Some of you turned away. Others, like Leora, showed me kindness without asking for anything in return. Your hearts have been true. And you are rewarded with love, honesty, and respect. That is worth more than any money." Gasps, murmurs, and wide-eyed stares rippled through the crowd. Some townsfolk lowered their heads, ashamed. Others whispered apologies they couldn't say aloud. Jorund, frozen in place, seemed unable to reconcile the boy he had disowned with the man standing before him. Virek's eyes softened as he looked at his father. There was no hatred, only a quiet, firm resolve. He would not allow greed or betrayal to poison his life any longer. Then a small smile crept across Leora's face. She reached for his hand, squeezing it gently, silently acknowledging the journey they had endured together. She had known his worth when others had mocked him, and now the world could see it too. Virek's revelation was not merely a display of wealth. It was a lesson, a mirror reflecting the true character of the townsfolk. Those who had been humble, kind and sincere like Leora were rewarded. Those who had been greedy, cruel or shallow were left to confront the consequences of their actions. In one simple act, Virek had exposed truth, inspired reflection, and set the record straight. As the ceremony continued, with music swelling and townsfolk looking on in awe, Virek and Leora exchanged vows, promising to walk life's path together. It was a moment of triumph, not just for love, but for justice, integrity, and the power of remaining true to oneself despite the betrayals of others. And as the final words were spoken, the townsfolk who had once doubted him began to understand. Virek's wealth was not what defined him. His character, his courage, and his capacity for love were what had truly made him great. The wedding had ended, but the echoes of the day lingered in the town. The drums, laughter, and chatter had faded, leaving behind a quiet tension. Virek watched from the veranda of the modest but elegant home he had built for Leora and himself, seeing the townsfolk scattered across the dusty streets, whispering to one another. Some were still in shock, trying to reconcile the image of the poor man they had mocked with the billionaire standing beside his new wife. Others, those who had treated him with kindness, looked on with quiet pride, grateful to have witnessed the truth. Virek knew that his work was far from over. Wealth, he realized, was not just about personal comfort. It was a tool, a means to bring justice, equity, and opportunity to the people who had been overlooked and neglected. But he would do it carefully. He would help, yes, but he would not feed greed or entitlement. The town had to learn that kindness and effort mattered more than the size of one's pocket. Over the next few weeks, Virek moved discreetly. He funded the construction of a small school, providing textbooks, supplies, and scholarships for children whose parents could not afford education. Clean water systems were installed, replacing the old contaminated wells that had caused illness for generations. He sponsored a health care clinic staffed with trained nurses and doctors who could treat townsfolk without demanding payment. Yet while the town benefited, Virek maintained boundaries. Those who had tried to exploit him, including his father, were kept at a distance. Jorand called repeatedly, leaving desperate messages begging for money and recognition. But now the old man's pride had melted into regret. Every sleepless night, every conversation replayed in his mind. He realized how cruel he had been, how easily he had let greed and shame cloud his love for his son. But the bridge he had burned could not be rebuilt by words alone. Virek read each of his father's messages, then deleted them. Blocking Jorand was not an act of cruelty. It was an act of self-preservation, a necessary boundary to ensure that greed and entitlement would no longer dictate his life. For years he had given out of obligation only to be disappointed. Now he would give with purpose and wisdom even as he ensured the town prospered. Virek found immense joy in his personal life. Leora, who had seen him at his most vulnerable, now shared in his triumph. Together they planned their future, not just in wealth but in impact. They dreamed of educational programs for other towns, of healthcare initiatives, and of opportunities for young people to break the cycles of poverty that had bound so many. Their love was bold, rooted in trust, shared values, and the knowledge that they could face anything together. Returning to Germany, Virek felt a sense of relief and liberation. The bustling streets of Berlin, once so intimidating, now felt like familiar territory. The skyline reminded him of how far he had come. From a boy struggling to survive in cramped hostels to a man capable of shaping lives and futures. He walked with Leora beside him, her hand in his, and for the first time in years, he felt a deep sense of peace. The journey he had taken from poverty to wealth, from mockery to revelation, had taught him a profound lesson. True character is revealed not by wealth, possessions, or status, but by how we treat those who have nothing. The people of Willow Creek had been tested, and while some had failed, others had shone brightly, proving that integrity, kindness, and humility were the true measures of greatness. Virek had gained more than money. He had gained clarity, a clear vision of the life he wanted to live, the principles he wanted to uphold, and the boundaries he would no longer compromise. He had gained love, a partnership with Leora that was deep, enduring, and resilient. And he had gained power, the kind of power that does not intimidate or oppress, but that creates change, empowers others, and shapes a better world. As he looked out over the city skyline, Virek felt the weight of his journey lift. The boy who had once walked the dusty streets of Willow Creek with nothing but dreams had become a man who could rewrite the destinies of others. starting with those he loved and those who had once doubted him, and with Leora by his side. He knew this was only the beginning. Together they would continue to build, to give, and to live a life defined not by wealth alone but by justice, love, and purpose. Joran, standing quietly in the background of Virek's thoughts, felt the full weight of his mistakes. Regret and sorrow filled him. He had disowned his son, judged him for appearances, and let pride blind him to the truth. Yet even in his remorse, he recognized the strength and wisdom his son now carried. Lessons he wished he could have learned before it was too late. If you enjoyed this story, please like this video. Subscribe to this channel so you won't miss our next interesting story filled with love, lessons, and unforgettable moments.